heart of the vineyards, but you can put it in perspective. You can see Reims, you can see the cathedral.
Oh,
see
yeah.
the cathedral, the dark building with the two towers.
Oh.
And what you'll notice, there's a couple of... I'm being filmed again. One thing you'll notice with Champagne is that it's not like a normal wine region where every square inch is covered in vines. With Champagne is all about the chalk. So on the flatlands you'll see it's just normal agricultural land.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you get to the hills, it's pretty much covered in the vineyards. The other thing with Champagne is that it's all about blending. So what you won't see here is your chateau, your house surrounded by its vineyards. It's all people will have vineyards dotted around all over the place, and I'll explain more about that when we get to the other house. But what I wanted to do before we go to this first tasting is just to explain some things about the vines to give you an idea. These ones we're looking at here are Pinot Noir. There are only 3 grapes you can use in Champagne. There's Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. Pinot Meunier is it's kind of more like the unheard of grape. It's really only used in Champagne, but it's a kind of a workhorse of blending. The first house we're going to go to is Champagnes are very much Meunier based, so they're very light, fresh. And then the next house we go to there's no Pinot Meunier, but it's more of a blend between Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. But these are Pinot Noir, and in Champagne, one thing you'll see is that all the vines are very low. So the main part of the vine, this part here, is always under ½ metre from the ground, and that's to keep it warm. And the climate here can be pretty. I think the average temperature is about throughout the year is about 10 degrees. In the winter it's can be very cold. You know, the last couple of years, for example, just completely covered in snow. And,
that answers that question. We were wondering yesterday if
it snows much. Or...
Yeah, a bit. But I say the last 2 years we've been covered in snow. And for the vines, it doesn't matter if you have the snow and frost during the winter. It's not a problem. The big thing for the vines is when the buds come out in March. Like growing anything, if you have a major frost when the buds come out, then it's critical. The next time is in about June when the flowers emerge, because fertilisation in Champagne is not done by bees, I think it's done by wind.
Oh.
So if you have too much rain when the flowers are out, then it just washes the pollen away. And so after that, you just want a good combination of a bit of rain, bit of sun, and also a bit of wind. The wind is important to aerate grapes to keep them dry. Last year, for example, was a fantastic year, right up until 2 weeks before the harvest, and then we had too much rain, no wind, and it was almost non-stop rain, and that meant that the grapes were becoming saturated and then started. Some of them, quite a few, rotted.
Oh.
So per hectare you'd normally harvest about, it depends on the grower, but between 8 and 12 tons of grapes. And there were some areas only harvesting about 4. So it was a bit of a difficult year. Yeah, so you can see the grapes already sort of starting to form.
Yeah.
But the harvest here will be it's normally in September, normally about the 3rd week of September. But this year we've had a lot of hot weather over the last few weeks. So if it carries on like this, the harvest will probably be in the 1st week of September. Point to note is most of the stuff here is done by hand. All the pruning is by hand. The harvest is all done by hand. No machines, because you don't want to damage the skins. And with Champagne, the Pinot Noir and Meunier are what we call black grapes, or red grapes. But you only want the clear juice from inside, so you don't want to damage the skins in any way. The other important thing is that when they're pressed very gently. so that again you're not damaging the skins, you're not releasing tannins from the skin, and then you're not compacting them too hard. One, so you don't want the discoloration, but then also when you start pressing too hard, then you're releasing more chemicals and things that you don't want for the champagne. Give you an idea, and also when they harvest, they quality select as well, so they don't pick every single bunch, only pick the best. You'll have some producers even do like a green harvest, so when the grapes are forming and still green, they'll come and take some bunches off so that the energy goes into all the good ones. But if they've managed their vines properly, then that's not entirely necessary.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
We get some grapes, that little teeny grapes they call champagne grapes. Are those ones? Do you have any idea what those are? Or?
No such thing.
Well, that's what I.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't make sense, but I thought about it. They're
very American.
Yeah.
You put them on a cheese platter, and they're just teeny weeny, and they're
so
very
good.
sweet.
Yeah.
And they call them champagne grapes, and it's just a beautiful little cluster.
Right.
It's very pretty on a plate.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Forgot about that, champagne grapes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're not edible.
Well, maybe maybe because they're sweet, they think they're good to
Yeah, maybe they just
have
call
with
them that.
champagne. I don't know.
No.
Crazy.
Could be.
Yeah, no.
No.
I mean, as you were talking about earlier, I mean, Champagne is controlled by an organisation called the CIVC, and they manage the worldwide name of Champagne and all the quality control. Champagne is the most quality controlled wine region in the world, which for the consumer is fantastic. But then they also help houses when they want to export, and and they protect the name of Champagne, and rightly so.
Yeah.
If you had the same grape, if you're growing the same grapes as you make a wine in Bordeaux, you're not going to call it Bordeaux. It's because it's not from Bordeaux.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Right.
and it might be you have similar-ish climates or whatever else, but it's still not from Champagne.
Right.
And there's a difference. So yeah, so you can't call anywhere else as sparkling wine, because that's what it is. Even if you use the traditional method with the second fermentation in the bottle, and you can't call it Champagne. The rest of the world recognise that. America was the last one to do so. Funny enough, I don't know why.
Yeah.
And there's
center of universe.
Yeah. We won't go there. Yeah.
No.
Good
choice.
Yeah. But yeah, and it's protected, but I agree with that. And but to give you an idea, whilst we're here, just before we go to the other house, with Champagne, the way they do the grapes, the hand harvested, and all the way that has to be managed. In each bottle of Champagne, just in cost of grapes, you're talking between €7 and €8, just in cost of grapes before you've done anything else.
It's really interesting to think about.
Yeah.
So this is it. And so there are three main areas of vineyards in Champagne. There are a number of areas, but the three main ones are the Montagne de Reims, which is where we are now. And you can see it stretches all the way around, and then and goes beyond. You can see it going round with the forest at the top, and then stretches around the other side. And the Montagne de Reims is very famous for its Pinot Noir, but you still have Chardonnay and everything grown here. And there's this actual bit of the mountain is called the Petit Montagne, and it's quite well known for its Pinot Meunier. The forest on the top, and over the other side is the Marne Valley, which stretches towards Paris, and that's famous for Pinot Meunier. And then south of Epernay is the Côte de Blanc, which is, as its name suggests, famous for its Chardonnay. If I talk about crus, do you understand crus? If I talk about Grand Cru, but do you understand where that comes from? About 100 years ago, there was in Champagne, there were actually these things called the Champagne Riots, about exactly 100 years ago in 1911, where there weren't really strict controls, and producers were taking advantage of the growers, and the producers were like buying cheap juice from elsewhere to make more champagne and not paying fair prices for grapes. So there were these big riots. They're called the Champagne riots, and after that they decided to formalise. Yeah, so in 1927, each area was assessed for the quality of the land, the geographical features, geological features, and a cru is basically a village.
Oh.
It's a champagne-making village. Or any AOC in France, so even Bordeaux will have Grand Cru and Premier Cru, traditional cru, and a cru is a village.
Okay.
And the vineyards of the village were assessed for how good they were for growing the grapes, and they were ranked between 80% and 100%. And so if the quality of the chalk was absolutely, fantastic, and the soils and southeast facing and various other features, they were given 100%. And if you got 100%, you were given Grand Cru status. If you got 90 to 99, you were given Premier Cru, and 80 to 89 traditional.
Okay.
And just to explain, in Champagne there are 319 villages, crus, only 17 are Grand Cru, only 42 Premier Cru, and the rest are Deuxième Cru, or traditional Cru. And the villages we're in at the moment are Premier Cru, and then we'll be going to a Grand Cru village this afternoon. But the house we're going to after this one also has vineyards in the Grand Cru village. As a champagne grower, you would need about 2.5 hectares to make a living. Do you understand a hectare, by the way? If I talk about hectare.
Like an acre?
No, it's hectare is about 2.2 acres. It's a football pitch. It's 100 metres by 100 metres. So still, it's not a big area. But yeah, you need about 2.5 hectares to make a living.
And you can live off of that? I mean,
Yeah.
it's considered making a living?
Yeah, you can live up. You're not going to be no. But to give you an idea, not that you can just come and buy hectares of vineyards. It doesn't work like that. Very rarely come up for sale. Very rarely, and even then, it would probably be a very small lot. A hectare of champagne vineyards would cost you about €1 million, and Grand Cru will cost you about 1.4 million euros a hectare. So it's cheap agricultural land. And so it wouldn't be in your generation or the next generation that would get a return on that. It would be
Exactly.
down the line. But you can't just come and buy vineyards anyway. It's not that easy. They just don't come up for sale. And those 30 in the vineyards, there are 34,000 hectares of champagne vineyards. But those hectares are broken up into about 281,000 different lots. So even if you have like 2.5 hectares, that would be about 15 different lots, which could be anywhere.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Be dotted around. And as a producer, you really want that to be for your blending.
That's true.
The house we're going to first is a very small house, and they're only using about a hectare for their champagne. They're in the family is in the champagne business. They have a number of vineyards, but for what they're doing, they can use about a hectare to make their champagne. Very much Pinot Meunier based. So I just wanted to give you an introduction to the vines, and then we'll go and have a tasting.